Welcome back. Yesterday, the Washington Post published this op-ed. I don't know Kavanaugh the judge, but Kavanaugh the carpool dad is one great guy. That's a real headline. To which I responded, I can't tell you anything about his legal expertise or his views on abortion or voting rights, but man, did that guy do a great job of not leaving my daughter at soccer practice. But then my boss, Ben Smith, had the audacity to defend that ridiculous op-ed on Twitter. Ben joins me now to explain his ridiculously wrong point of view, if he can. Ben, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on your last day here at BuzzFeed.
I do keep saying this is I'm probably going to get fired because Ben's about to get destroyed on television, so let's do this. Ben, explain to me, as the editor-in-chief of a major news website, would you have published that op-ed?
So I think I'm going to climb down a little and say this was a lame and boring story. And it was as lame and boring as the piece about Merrick Garland's worthy work tutoring students in northern Washington. And actually, I really enjoyed the piece about Sonia Sotomayor's barbecue orders and her poker nights. And I once wrote a piece at the urging, actually, of Elena Kagan's circle about how she was, in fact, had dated men. And there is extremely boring and treacly coverage that is part of the ritual of a Supreme Court rollout. And I think maybe, those rituals are dusty, perhaps unsuited for this era, but the level of outrage and sort of shock and horror that perhaps your tweet was part of, I thought was misplaced, misapplied. So I'm more attacking you than defending the article.
No, clearly. I love this. And kudos to you for coming on to defend your ridiculously wrong point of view. I think that's very brave. I will say, to correct a few things there, this wasn't a reported profile piece. This was an entire op-ed from someone whose daughter happens to go to school with his daughter.
An entire op-ed? This is like a thing? It's like short letter to the editor.
In the Washington Post. This isn't a blog entry. This is the Washington Post publishing an op-ed from one woman's point of view, and who freely admits in the piece, which was very moving, let's be very clear, it was a nice piece, but who freely admits...
For some of us also, carpool culture is more important than others. You probably would have Sonia Sotomayor's...
Okay, but it's not. How is it at all relevant? And she acknowledges in the piece that it is not at all relevant to his ability to serve for the next 40 years, defining what the Constitution means for real Americans in this country. I don't see why they pulled the published trigger on that. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I thought it was a boring and lame piece. I would not have published it. But I also think it is a basically harmless and silly piece. And so, I think, and it doesn't bear on his ability to serve in the court probably any more than, Roy Moore's child predation bears on his votes in the United States Senate. The notion that usually you write the dog bites man story about how the guy is terrible in the carpool because it's interesting, rather than the man bites dog story about how he is nice in the carpool. But the flow of that story is it's incredibly boring, not that it is some assault on American democracy and journalism.
But again, there's a difference between an op-ed and a story, and I think having a profile piece where you're introducing him to people and you're putting that in context with his judicial views and what they're going to mean for people, absolutely, I think that's relevant. But this is different.
You may not have read
these
profile pieces about Merrick Garland's tutoring. It was quoting prepared statements in the Washington Post, actually, about what a nice tutor he was. Okay,
but again, this was an entire woman's solo perspective on this man's carpooling abilities. And also, I think it's a bit disingenuous to compare this to Roy Moore. This is not an elected position. Voters are never going to have a say on this again for the next 40 years. In fact, they don't even get a say now.
But every Supreme Court justice, and certainly there are questions about their character. I don't think anybody would say the questions about Supreme Court justices' characters aren't relevant. If it was found that he had sexually harassed colleagues, that would obviously be relevant.
But again, we're not talking that. Not only is that a false equivalent here, we're not talking about sexual harassment. We're talking about carpool culture. That's a false offense. That's actually quite offensive.
If he was a horrible person who nobody got along with, again, we're talking about a tiny margin of relevance, right? That is not relevant the way his abortion brews are relevant. But you look at Gorsuch right now. There have been reports he is alienating people on the court and losing votes because they think he's a jerk. It's not totally, character isn't totally irrelevant.
I would agree that character is relevant to some small part, but when you've got someone in the piece who freely acknowledges in the headline that she can give you nothing to offer about his judicial abilities, I don't understand why this was published. It read like an Onion piece to me.
I don't understand why you have devoted so much energy to promoting
I don't understand why you decided to tweet it against me.
So successfully. trolled you into promoting the work of Mike Madden. I feel like the only winner here is the op-ed editor of the Washington Post, Mike Madden, who is watching us and cackling and,
How dare
delight.
I be offended that the nation's press would promote something so garbage at such an important time, because they're literally going to be one shot at this, and then he's going to be on there for the next 4 years.
I mean, there is a lot. I think there is a lot of other coverage, much of it, including a lot by us of the important stuff around this nomination.
Absolutely, but that doesn't give a free ride on one article. I don't think to say that, like, because there's other things that we can publish this nonsense, I don't think that's fair.
As the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed, I particularly object to the form of argument that is, I do not like one thing on your website, and I'm going to ignore everything else.
So, okay, let's go back. Just pretend we're in 2016 again.
Yeah.
It's Merrick Garland's been put forward. Merrick Garland's barista sends you an email and says, he's a nice guy. Every morning he greets me with a smile and gives me a tip. Would you publish that on BuzzFeed.com?
Absolutely not. Would I throw a fit if the Washington Post did? No, I would ignore it. I wouldn't read it.
Okay, well, there we go. So Ben has basically conceded that I'm 100% right, and just as he did in the green room before he came out, ladies and gentlemen.
And my only defense is to attack him. I've spent a lot of time in Washington.
I love that. Thank you very much, Ben. And hopefully I still have a job by the end of today. We'll see. Up next, we're going live from the district where this nonsense is originating from. So thank you.
Thank you, David.